Sky News goes inside eastern Ukraine with the defence units trying to down Russian drones.
They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians, so they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
Also ahead, failing NHS hospitals to be named and shamed under new health reforms. Tech billionaire Elon Musk is handed a role in Donald Trump's top team. Pressure grows on the Church of England over child sex abuse claims as the Archbishop of Canterbury resigns. And plans to find social media bosses who don't remove adverts for illegal knives in the latest attempt to crack down on crime. Well, we'll be going to Stuart Ramsey's extraordinary report from the front lines in Ukraine in just a moment. But first, to touch base with what else is coming up on the show. And Wes Streeting will be joining us at about 1:15. And Mara, it's a busy day coming out of Westminster. And just to break down what he's announcing today very quickly.
Absolutely. So Wes Streeting is announcing reforms to the NHS. He wants to essentially penalise and punish bad reforming NHS providers by creating a league table where people can be named and shamed, and those who are doing well can then get more flexibility around the kind of money they can spend on tech and things like that.
Of course, comes as he's getting more money to spend on his department from the Chancellor as well. We're also getting some announcements from the Home Secretary today.
Yes, we are. So the Home Office announcing these new rules where basically they're going to try and fine social media execs if they fail to kind of comply with strict laws around advertising of knives, zombie knives, ninja knives, size cones.
So we'll discuss a little bit of that with him as well. Also, Claire Coutinho coming up the following hour, and we'll be building up. PMQs is a lot on the agenda this week.
Absolutely. It's going to be jam-packed, and I think there's going to be a lot of difficult questions for Keir Starmer on not just crime, but also, you know, those NHS reforms as well.
Mara, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Mara will be with us, of course, all morning building up to all of those stories. And Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, will be joining us at 1:15. But first, to the war in Ukraine, where Russia has been deploying a record number of drones as Moscow shows a revival in its fight against Kyiv. The US says North Korean troops are part of this resurgence in the conflict along the border, with soldiers actively engaged in the war. Meanwhile, Ukraine is keeping a close eye on President-elect Trump and how appointments to his cabinet could impact the military aid sent from the West. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has been in the region of Sumy, in the northeast of Ukraine, where Ukrainian soldiers track and attempt to shoot down Russian drones before they reach cities or power plants. Stuart spent 48 hours with the soldiers there, and a warning, his report contains flash photography.
Every night, the tarpaulin covers are pulled off Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns and prepped for action. On battered trucks, they rumble into the night to take up defensive positions. The Russian drone attacks on Ukraine's cities and power plants are constant, and these old guns are the country's main defense against drones. The soldiers can track the drones, many supplied to Russia by Iran, on handheld tablets. This is modern warfare colliding with old-fashioned technology. They wait and listen and watch. In fields all around us, other units join the attack. In truth, only about 30% of the drones and missiles in this sector are actually shot down.
So the soldiers are picking up the shells that have been fired from the weapons at the passing missile. The reason for that is they don't want people to see that they've been firing from here. They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians. So they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
Captain Serhey of the 117th Brigade is in charge of 160 men in 8 mobile units protecting the southern sector of the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine, near the Russian border. Air raid sirens blare as he monitors the drones, and they're coming. We speed after him through checkpoints and along darkened roads. The drone is above us.
Lights off! Lights off. I'm going to come on.
You can still hear the drone in the sky. They're trying to find it with searchlights. But another has got through.
We need a stronger, more automated air defense system that operates independently of human involvement.
It is absolutely relentless. An Iranian Shahid drone is flying over. They're tracking its flight, and they attack. These Ukrainian defenders, hundreds of them, will man the guns for another freezing night. The last line of defense. It's not good, but it's better than nothing. The Ukrainian military's dependence on foreign weaponry, particularly American, can't be underestimated. Hidden in a forest, they're repairing an American Bradley fighting vehicle. They haven't got enough of anything already. If Donald Trump cuts the supply, the Ukrainians will lose. It's that simple. Sasha Shershin is one of Ukraine's top field commanders. He's 30 years old. His 47th Battalion is fighting in the Russian territory of Kursk. Ukraine invaded in the summer. He's gloomy about his country's prospects, but he and his men will fight to the last.
I mean that situation is we have a lack of weapon, we have a lack of artillery, we have a lack of infantry, and other world don't care about the justice, you know, and they don't want to finish the war by our winning, you know. They're afraid Russia. I'm sorry, but they scare it. They scare it, and it's not the right way.
Along this 1,000-kilometre front line, there is a continuous movement of military vehicles going forward and ambulances coming back. Far behind the lines, miles inside Ukraine, new defensive positions are being built. An indicator, perhaps, of how this country is beginning to think.
Well, Stuart, I'm delighted to say, joins us now from eastern Ukraine. Stuart, fantastic report as ever, extraordinary access. What's the morale like at the moment, and what's the reality of who's winning in the recent weeks and months whilst you've been there?
Well, the reality, I think, is that at the moment Russia is definitely in the ascendancy. It is taking ground in the southeast, and we know in the Kursk area, which is obviously in Russia, they're massing what we believe as many as 50,000 soldiers to try to take that region back from the Ukrainians who've held parts of it since the summer. So I would say at the moment the Ukrainian army is in quite a lot of trouble. Morale is always quite good with the soldiers because they know they have to fight and they're determined to do so. But of course, like everyone here, they're looking at what happened in the United States and the results of this election and what is going to happen next. And of course, that really is the key to everything that happens in the future. And of course, Donald Trump has famously said he'll end this in a couple of days or so. But I think that's easier said than done, especially when you have two protagonists, Russia and Ukraine, who are fighting constantly and have no intention of stopping until perhaps their hand is forced and so that they have to come to the table. The question is, how can Trump do that?
Stuart, two questions with all of that in mind. I mean, were they laser focused, the soldiers, on what was happening in Washington, D.C. and across America last week, or clearly did they have other more pressing things at hand, such that this news has drip-fed over to them over the last couple of days? And what is the view of those soldiers that are so much in harm's way towards a potential peace deal? We know what Zelensky's view is on it. Are the soldiers aligned with their president?
I think they are. I mean, I think there's a general sense in the country, and there's been polling which shows a majority do not want land to be handed over or ceded to Russia in any way. But it's only just over 50%. There's a good 40% who are saying maybe the war should just come to an end and that we just have to accept that we have lost land. So as it stands now, the official position and the majority position in the country is that they do not want to give up territory to Russia. But there is definitely a large number of people in the country who believe that maybe it's inevitable and they just have to accept those losses, because obviously to end it now would be better than the continuous fight and the huge numbers of soldiers who are being killed. Regarding the election itself, no, the soldiers are not laser focused on what's happening in Washington, DC. They have an awful lot of work to do here. Most of them basically talking to us, and we did speak to quite a lot of soldiers, were saying basically there's a lot of talk going on. Nothing has changed whatsoever, and until our orders are simple, we have that we're in the midst of a war and we have to keep fighting, and and we will do so until that changes. I think that in a general sense, people are looking to see what can happen. Can Trump force either side to the negotiating table? Now, of course, it's all about leverage then. So for President Zelensky, it's quite simple, really, because Donald Trump could say, you're not having any weapons, and that's the end of that. And actually, it would be the end of that, because without American military support, this resistance to Russia just simply can't continue. But Putin, does he have any leverage on Putin? Well, of course, there is a view that rather than actually perhaps go to Putin and say, come on, let's do a deal, he actually says, well, if you won't do a deal with us and you won't talk, we're going to absolutely load Ukraine with weapons, and we're going to give them permission to attack Russia wherever it can reach with long-range weapons. So that might be a way he can get him to the table. However, none of this is happening for the time being. There is another president in place at the moment, and he is promising, President Biden that is promising to send more money to Ukraine to bolster their war effort. So that's the situation we're in now. The war goes on. More money and arms will come to Ukraine, according to the White House. And what happens in the future is really a matter for President Trump when he takes office to explain to the world.
Stuart, as always, thanks so much. Stay safe. Time for all of the day's other stories now. Leah's got those for us. Leah.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. I want to take viewers to Baku because COP29, well, it enters its third day, and scientists have warned that carbon emissions from fossil fuels will reach record levels this year. Plus, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced fresh climate change targets. Let's go live now to our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, in Baku for us. Morning to you, Tom. What's on the agenda today?
Well, this summit, this round of talks at COP29, remember we've been doing this now for nearly 30 years. It's about the same thing. It's about trying to up that ambition to reduce emissions of fossil fuels, and the tools, the mechanisms, the ideas that have to come together to do that. As you mentioned just there, the news today that rather than falling, despite all these years of talking, emissions around the world are still going up. By a lot less, just 1% since the year before. But that is 1% too much, because in fact they have to be falling year on year by about 9% between now and 2050 if we're going to get anywhere close to the Paris goal of keeping warming below 2 degrees and as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. And right now we are way off the mark. The talks here are focusing on finance, how to get flows of money from wealthy countries that grew rich from burning their fossil fuels to poorer ones to try and persuade them not to follow the same polluting path. But right now, those talks are being described as a disaster and a mess, because everyone's coming to them with different ideas, different proposals, and different kind of numbers. Poor countries are saying it's going to be at least $1.4 trillion that need to flow every year between now and 2030 to get us on that track, whereas rich countries are coming with barely a few hundred million scraped together between all of them. So there is an awful lot of negotiating yet to go, and really they're only just getting started.
OK, Tom, thank you. It's Tom Clark there in Baku with the very latest from COP29. Back here, the teenager accused of murdering 3 girls at a Taylor Swift dance party is due to appear in court today. Axel Rubicana also faces 10 counts of attempted murder over July's mass stabbing in Southport. Well, last month, the 18-year-old was handed extra charges, including a terror offence, based on evidence police say they found at his home. The Post Office may announce that it's closing dozens of branches in a cost-cutting drive as early as today. Under the plan, 115 loss-making branches wholly owned by the Post Office could be shut. The group is also considering cutting 1,000 jobs at its head office. British author Samantha Harvey has won the Booker Prize with the novel Orbital, the first book set in space to win the prize. It was the biggest-selling book on this year's shortlist about astronauts looking down on Earth from the International Space Station. And the Princess of Wales will host her annual Christmas Carol concert this year after completing treatment for cancer. The service, which is held at Westminster Abbey, will focus on the importance of love and supporting each other in the most difficult of times.
Now, US President-elect Donald Trump has announced that Elon Musk will lead the Department of Government Efficiency when he takes over at the Oval Office. The President-elect says the world's richest man will join Vivek Ramaswamy in the post that will advise from outside of government. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has this report.
Well, quite the flurry of announcements from Mar-a-Lago from President-elect Donald Trump overnight about the type of people he will surround himself with in a second presidency. We knew earlier in the day that Marco Rubio is likely to be the US Secretary of State. That is America's top diplomat. But as it would turn out, that was the most conventional of all the announcements that were to come, because it has now been confirmed that Elon Musk will be the head of a new government Department of Efficiency that will, oddly, we don't understand quite how this works, but oddly sit outside government. That may be because Elon Musk is in charge of several companies who have massive government contracts, which prevents him from working within government, but somehow they've fudged it, and so he will sit outside government, heading up this Department of Government Efficiency alongside Vivek Ramaswamy. Donald Trump has said overnight, "I look forward to Elon and Vivek making changes to the federal bureaucracy with an eye on efficiency and at the same time making life better for all Americans." He goes on to say, "Importantly, we will drive out the massive waste and fraud which exists throughout our annual $6.5 trillion of government spending." So that is those two characters having a central role, albeit outside of government, but certainly looking at government efficiency in a Trump second term, something that Donald Trump has promised that he would do with Elon Musk's help. The other announcement, or two more announcements. One, the US ambassador to Israel has been announced. That is Mike Huckabee. And he is a man who is incredibly pro-Israel. He has said in the past that the West Bank does not exist, that settlements do not exist, that the Palestinians, if they want their own state, should perhaps move somewhere else. So I think there we can see the direction of travel in terms of the way that Trump would like to mould the Middle East and the peace process there, and any chance for a two-state solution seem distant indeed with Mike Huckabee in charge. And then perhaps the most interesting of all the announcements, Pete Hegseth, who is a Fox News host, is to become US Defense Secretary. He is a well-known figure on Fox News. He is a veteran as well, served in the military in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo Bay, where he defended the treatment of inmates there. Yes, he is to be the new US Defense Secretary in charge of the most powerful military in the world.
Mark Stone there on some of the headline-grabbing appointments from Donald Trump overnight, and we'll be discussing some of those with Michael Yaki, a former senior advisor to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, at 7:45, so do stay tuned for that. Now, underperforming NHS trusts across England are to be named and shamed as part of the Health Secretary's new measures. Wes Streeting's new zero tolerance for failure approach to the health system will also see NHS managers sacked if they don't turn things around. We can speak to the Health Secretary now about those measures in more detail. He joins us from Salford. A very good morning, Health Secretary. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
What's the headline then of this new plan?
Well, we announced investment for the NHS in the budget, biggest capital allocation since Labour was last in government, biggest cash increase of any public service. Today we're announcing a package of reform that will go alongside that investment. So I'm struck by the fact since the budget, lots of people welcome the investment, but they worry that the money will be well spent. And today what we're setting out is a whole package of reform measures around leadership in the NHS, giving high-performing leaders in high-performing trusts and providers more freedom, less central diktat and control, because I genuinely think that people who are leading public services closer to the communities they are serving are probably better placed to make decisions than politicians or national leaders sat in Whitehall, in Westminster or in Leeds, where the NHS and the Department of Health is based. We will also provide support to those trusts that fall behind the leaders of the pack to help them to improve, invest in leadership management so we can recruit and retain the best leaders. And where people consistently fall short and where they're just not up to it, then we will manage out poor performance as well. And I think that's what the public rightly expect. They want to know that the investment that's going into the NHS will be put to good use in a well-led, well-managed NHS that delivers great patient outcomes. And that's part of the package we're announcing today, just one of a number of reform announcements we'll be making in the coming weeks and months.
One line of the press release says persistently failing managers will be replaced and turnaround teams of expert leaders will be deployed. Who are the experts we're talking about there?
Well, we've got some of them going into hospitals and have been going to hospitals in recent weeks. These are people who've got great experience of clinical leadership, of doing things like reorganising clinics to get waiting lists down faster. But it will also include senior managers who have got an outstanding track record of turnaround and improvement. And you talked about naming and shaming. Let me name and praise for a moment. My local NHS trust, Barking, Havering and Redbridge, which is on the London-Essex border, has been known as a troubled trust for many years. It's been in and out of special measures, and we've had a merry-go-round of senior managers. We now have a great leader in Matthew Traynor, who is leading a really great team, who are not only now recognised as one of the fastest improving trusts in the country, but are doing nationally leading work in terms of improving the productivity in the elective recovery, so getting through waiting lists faster. We're not chuck loads of money at the trust. This is using the same tools and the same resources that other trusts are doing, but he's a really good example of what outstanding leadership can do. And I want that kind of leadership across the NHS. I want to support great leaders. I want to develop great leaders because they can be the difference between high performance and great patient care or poor performance and poor patient safety. And when we talk about very senior managers, I make no apology whatsoever for wanting the best and for wanting to incentivise the best leaders going into some of the most challenging areas. But I also make no apology for wanting to manage out the worst, as we would in any other workplace, in any other business or any other context, but where poor performance is too often being tolerated in the NHS. And what happens with that merry-go-round of poor managers is they get made redundant or managed out, be given a payoff in one area, and then they pop up in another area, and there have been too many examples of that too.
Have you been able to make all of the changes that you've wanted to make, or has there been too many layers of bureaucracy or management or red tape or rules and regulations or pushback that has stopped you doing all that you want to do?
Well, we're just getting started, but I've heard lots of criticism over the years that the NHS is too centralised, too much top-down command and control, and now I sit at the top of that system, at the top of the mountain of accountability in the NHS. I not only recognise that criticism, I share it. And that's why a big part of what I'm announcing today is actually about giving away power and control, trusting great leaders, recognising great performance and letting go of central control. I genuinely think that's how we'll get better leadership, better management, more innovation. And as we do that, and as we put more resource and more power and more freedom to the front line, we will also be shrinking the centre, because I do think there is a legitimate criticism to be made that as new layers have been introduced in the NHS, and we've had new things like integrated care systems, integrated care boards, we have not seen the centre shrink at the same time. The NHS has a culture of and more, and we need to start learning the words stop and make better use of taxpayers' money. And then the final thing I'd say is there are lots of people working in the NHS who, when they kind of see some of the headlines around league tables and transparency, might assume, therefore, more targets, more tick boxes and more bureaucracy. Actually, what we want to do is to have less of that and a real focus on the things that really matter in terms of patient care, patient safety and good quality outcomes. So as people see more from us in the coming weeks and months with things like the NHS mandate, the instructions to deliver given by the government, the operating plan from the NHS, people will see a shift in that direction because we've got too many targets. And if you're measuring everything, actually what you end up doing is measuring nothing. And that's part of the reform that we're leading in the NHS.
You know, it's so interesting, Health Secretary, hearing all of those points and that rhetoric from you, because it sounds not dissimilar from the rhetoric we've seen in the last couple of weeks from the new head of the Department of Government Efficiency in the United States, in Elon Musk. Do you think you and he share similar sentiments towards driving government efficiency?
That was not the comparison I was expecting this morning, but I do think there is an issue here about reform of public services, and let me tell you, there are two bosses that I am accountable to: my direct line manager, which is the Prime Minister, and then, of course, there are my ultimate bosses, which are the British people and the people of Ilford North who send me to Parliament. I know that they're going to judge me and they're going to judge this government on whether at the next election waiting lists are lower, waiting times are shorter, and whether they see an NHS that is improving rather than failing. And that's why we've got to make sure that alongside the investment announced by the Chancellor is reform, to make the NHS more efficient, to make it more productive, and to give the staff the tools to do the job, because let me tell you, it's not the frontline staff the public have doubt in. In fact, they consistently rate doctors, nurses, other frontline NHS staff as the people they trust most, not just in the NHS but in the whole country. But we definitely need to improve the leadership, the management, the accountability of the NHS.
In a year's time, though, as both of you have worked hard to try and drive efficiency in big government departments with big budgets, would you welcome meeting with Elon Musk to compare notes of what works and what doesn't work?
I'd be very surprised if I see that meeting in my diary. But one of the things that I have been doing as Health and Social Care Secretary, in not just the last 4 months, but actually the last few years when I was shadowing the job as well, is learning from frontline NHS staff, learning from our best NHS leaders, and also learning from people who lead organisations, whether public services or businesses, in a whole range of contexts. Because what I've got on my hands is a big change management challenge in one of the biggest public services in the world, a vital piece of critical national infrastructure, one that has enormous potential, but one that has also been failing. The NHS is broken, but it is not beaten. And what we are doing as a government on both investment and reform should give people the confidence that we can turn this around and make sure that the NHS, publicly funded, free at the point of use, that's been there for us for the last 76 years, will be there for us in the next century. But we've got to get this right, because if we fail, then the NHS will not have a future.
A final question, Health Secretary, on assisted dying. Is your mind made up on how you're going to vote, or are there any changes to the bill, any amendments that could alter your perspective on the issue?
My view on this is pretty settled, and as I told Kay when I was last on, I'm voting against the bill. But I do welcome two things. Firstly, this is a free vote. The government is neutral. The Prime Minister is still deciding how he's going to vote. He's studying the bill. But he's been very clear to all Labour MPs this is a free vote and people must make up their own minds, and it is a genuinely free vote. The second thing I'd say, I might be voting against this bill. I really welcome the way that Kim Leadbeater and proponents of the bill are conducting the argument, the way in which they're engaging with arguments, and the way in which the debate is playing out. I actually think in the coming weeks we're going to see Parliament at its best in terms of the quality of the debate, the integrity of the debate, and the way in which people will study and scrutinise the detail, because this is both a principled issue about assisted dying, and it's also one about the practical challenges, the practical issues. I've very much fallen down in opposition to this bill on practical issues, but I have huge admiration and respect for colleagues and friends who are taking a different view. So I hope that in the coming weeks, on such an important and sensitive issue, we'll not only give the public the debate they deserve, I really hope that we'll start to rebuild public confidence and trust in politics because of the way that Parliament is currently debating what is a really important issue.
Here, Health Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it, as always.
Thank you.
Mari's here on set to discuss some of the tech. I mean, I'm not trying to be silly on the Elon Musk thing. I mean, I actually don't quite know why the answer, and we put him on the spot, wouldn't be, well, sure, I'd welcome at least the discussion and the meeting to compare notes. He didn't say he would refuse it, but he just didn't expect it. But, you know, it's interesting to hear, you know, the Labour Health Secretary so focused on trying to deliver efficiency and cut waste and remove arbitrary targets and the like.
I think you're right. I think that, you know, that they might not like the comparison, but there is a comparison to be had. And I think that's what's interesting is, I mean, realistically, for the Labour Party, they are not going to want to be seen to be, you know, asking for tips, let's say, from a Republican government with which they are not going to agree on a lot of areas, and also that might put Labour voters off. Because you've got to remember, the majority of Labour voters in this country are probably not going to be big fans of the Republican Party in the US. It's a massive kind of political divide between the two. And therefore, they are not going to want their party, as it were, to be seen to be kind of cozying up too much to quite a right-wing government that they will fundamentally disagree with. So I think the Labour Party are going to be careful not to kind of look like they are making friends too closely with everybody, including, for instance, Elon Musk. But in terms of what Wes Streeting was talking about NHS reforms there, I mean, this is clearly a carrot and a stick approach, a bit of both, right? So the incentivising of the people who are doing a really good job, carrot. The sacking of those who are doing a terrible job, stick. And so they're trying to get that balance right in terms of improving outcomes for patients as quickly as possible. And Wes Streeting was very clear that actually his job as kind of head of the NHS, as it were, politically speaking, is he will be judged on whether these reforms work. The proof in the pudding is in the eating. And therefore, you know, he's saying, on my head be it if this doesn't work. So he's really trying to say, actually, the stakes are high and I believe in these reforms. He talked about that there are going to be more reforms coming in the next few weeks and months as well. So it'll be interesting to see what else we see come out from that. And then very quickly on assisted dying, he was very clear that the PM has not made up his mind on the assisted dying bill, which is interesting because Kim Leadbeater yesterday had said, as far as she was concerned, the PM was in favour and was going to vote that way. And what we were saying yesterday was, well, we actually haven't had that from the PM's team. And Streeting is very clearly clarifying that the PM has not decided yet. Many people expect him to vote in favour because of what he's done in the past, but the fact that he's not putting that out there...
well, the Health Secretary is also very clear he's not voting in favour of it, or
no, not at all.
Regardless of anything, which I think is interesting. But yeah, his context there on these measures he's announcing for the health service was very clear and quite rational, I thought. Mari, as always, thanks so much. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, how Ukraine is fighting back as Russia deploys a record number of drones. We'll speak to a Ukrainian politician. Plus, social media bosses could soon face big fines for failing to remove knife commercials, and how Elon Musk's appointment to Donald Trump's top team will go down in Washington. We'll speak to a former senior advisor to the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse.
We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, we'll be speaking to the Ukrainian MP Lesia Vasylenko. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories. Leah's got that for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Underperforming NHS trusts are to be named and shamed. This is part of a new government measure to tackle poor performance. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, told this show he wants to give more power and freedom to the front line of the health service. Russia has been deploying a record number of drones in Ukraine as Moscow shows a revival in its fight against Kyiv. It comes as blasts were heard across Kyiv this morning, with the Ukrainian Air Force having put the entire country under an air raid alert. And US President-elect Donald Trump has announced Elon Musk will lead a new Department of Government Efficiency. Mr. Trump said the appointment would help slash regulations and cut wasteful expenditures.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's get more now on the war in Ukraine. And Ukrainian forces have been fighting a record number of Russian drone attacks. But there are concerns Ukraine might lose support from the US as Donald Trump takes over the White House. Well, the president-elect has promised to end the war soon as he takes office. Joining me to discuss this here in person, I'm delighted to say, is Ukrainian MP Lesia Vasylenko. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning.
First and foremost, how are things going at the moment on the ground?
Very difficult. This morning, just 20 minutes ago, a new air raid has started in Kyiv. Every time an air raid starts, our phone go off with air raid alarm signals, and it's been like this through the night. And it's been like this every night for the last 2 months. Without a break, Russia has been bombing Ukraine.
Do you think that without extra sudden help from the West that Ukraine would be in a very difficult position? How soon?
It would be in an extremely difficult position. We need all the help we can get, not just from the United States, but also from Britain, from European states and from all over the world.
How closely have you and your colleagues and your country people been watching the results of the US election? Is it a concern for you that Donald Trump won?
It's been the main topic of discussion in political circles in Ukraine for the last half a year or so. Now that we have the results in, we understand that we still have a window of opportunities to lay down the basis for US policy in the next 2 months before the inauguration of President Trump. For this, we require certain actions of President Biden.
So you are really focused on just the final days of the Biden presidency, not necessarily working with President Trump to convince him of your position. Do you think that's an impossible task?
It's not an impossible task. The work there is going on as we speak. Our diplomatic circles are working on that. Our ministers are working on that. There's delegations of members of parliament in the US constantly who are working with Republicans very closely. So we hope that there will be still a policy of understanding that Ukraine must win for there to be stability in the world, economic stability first and foremost, which is very understandable to President Trump and all of his team.
If you don't get the support you need from the US, whether in the short term from Biden or the medium term from Trump, is Europe capable of supporting you with what you need or not?
Hardly so. Europe has had almost 3 years now to reformat its defence and security production, manufacturing of the weapons that it is producing to amplify the efforts it can do in the defence and security sector. However, there has been little done in these 2 years that Ukraine has won for Europe and the world, really, to change around their security, defense and security setup. And Ukraine has done it with Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian blood.
So do you see these next couple of months, and in particular your negotiations with the United States, as make or break for the future of Ukraine?
They are crucially important, but the future of Ukraine depends, and we realize this today, on Ukraine alone and Ukrainian efforts alone. I would remind you that in 2022, when Russia escalated its aggression, nobody believed Ukraine would stand. The world was giving us 3 days at max to survive before we would fall and collapse under Russian rule. However, 3 years into this escalated war, total war, we are still standing. And we have it in us because we understand that we are fighting for our very survival.
Obviously, there's been an election here earlier in the year as well. You're here in London for a few days, meeting with the government and with the shadow ministers. How has Ukraine seen the change of government here? Has it meant a change in the level of support that Ukraine has received or not?
The UK has always stood by Ukraine, regardless which party is in power. And it's not just a theoretical notion that we throw out there for political reasons. It's really the case. So meeting this week with government, with shadow government officials, with members of parliament, newly elected, and actually this is the purpose of our visit, to get acquainted with the newly elected members of parliament. We feel that support and we hear the determination to do more for Ukraine. So we are hoping that there will be soon an equal delegation of British members of parliament to Ukraine so that they can feel and see for themselves what is going on the ground and bringing back to Westminster to push for those very important decisions that Ukraine needs right now.
Regardless of what happens in the US, is one of the things you're here to deliver to the government, to request from Keir Starmer, is full permission to use British weapons into Russian territory, regardless of what the US does or doesn't want?
Full permission to use weapons to strike at Russian military targets is what Ukraine needs. We are hoping not just to be able to do it with British weapons, but all the weapons that have been delivered to Ukraine. This is why it's crucial that the UK takes on a leading role, speaking to European leaders, speaking to still President Biden, to have that permission set in place in the next coming days, maybe weeks.
Lesya Vasilenko, thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to see you. Well, if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the latest episode of the World podcast with Richard and Yalda. This week, they're discussing Donald Trump's emerging foreign policy and what it might mean for the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Well worth subscribing to The World if you haven't already. Now, social media bosses who failed to remove adverts of illegal knives from their platforms could face fines of up to £10,000 as part of proposals being considered by the government to halve knife crime in the next decade. Alice Porter's here with more on this. Alice, these are things that are already illegal to buy, to sell, to do anything about, and yet commercials still exist for them.
Yeah, that's right. And this is about illegal knives. So this isn't your knives that you use for, in the kitchen or whatever. There is an extensive list. I was just looking at on the government website of illegal knives. Some of them are knives that we've heard before when it comes to sort of awful killings, such as zombie knives. So these are illegal, but we understand that they are being advertised on social media companies, on online platforms, and the Home Office wants to tackle this issue, and that's why they're bringing about these potential changes. So what would happen was the police would be empowered to issue warnings to senior officials at online companies, social media companies, and demand that adverts that are advertising these illegal weapons that the government says glorifies violence, wanting them to be removed potentially within 2 days. And if they're not removed within 2 days, then the senior executives at the companies could be personally liable for a fine if they're not taken down. But there are, of course, going to be a huge number of difficulties with that, because social media companies have been notoriously difficult to find over all sorts of issues. Many of them are not based in the UK. Many of them have headquarters in other countries. So the devil really is going to be in the detail about how these fines would actually operate. I think this is clearly part of Labour's sort of strategy when it comes to tackling knife crime. They want it halved over the next decade or so. And we have got the Online Safety Bill coming in, the Online Safety Act, which, of course, the government is hoping this will force social media companies to take more responsibility for their online content. So I think this is very much part of that, but how it will actually work really remains to be seen.
Alice, as always, thanks so much. We've got lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. Donald Trump appoints the world's richest man to his top team in an attempt to cut through bureaucracy and regulations. What will Elon Musk's impact be on the US government? We'll discuss that next.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
US President-elect Donald Trump has announced that Elon Musk will lead the Department of Government Efficiency when he takes over at the Oval Office. I'm joined now to discuss this and a slew of high-profile announcements from the President-elect over the last 24 hours Michael Yaki joins me, a former senior advisor to Nancy Pelosi. Michael, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Will.
Why don't we start with Elon Musk's appointment? I mean, this was quite well trailed and suggested. So are we surprised, and can Trump's critics be disappointed by this appointment or not, really, given the mandate?
Well, I guess the question is, it's a department that doesn't exist right now. So where are you going to get the money to fund it? Plus, it's being co-helmed by Vivek Ramaswamy, who was one of his Trump's opponents on the campaign. Some people are thinking that his desire to wipe out the Department of Education will simply transfer those resources to this department, which still has an unknown brief, and we have no idea what it does and whether or not he can even serve, given his very clear conflicts with receiving a fair amount of money from NASA for his SpaceX program.
Well, the conflict's definitely are fairly brutal to consider. The overall aim of appointing someone who's obviously overwhelmingly successful in business to try and drive efficiency across the government, is that something, whatever your politics, stepping back, that both sides, I guess, can see there being a legitimate cause for and wish him success in?
Well, the issue is, what is it that he's trying to do? I mean, there was a reinventing government initiative by Al Gore back in the late 1990s, where they talked about how do we trim the federal government? How do we try and make its mission more palatable and more accurate, more consumer-friendly? We're not too sure what Elon Musk is saying, because he's saying, well, I'd like to cut $2.7 trillion from the federal budget, which is the entire discretionary budget of the United States. Add to that, he said, well, you know, there's going to be a lot of pain before people are going to be happy about this. What does that mean exactly as well? So when you have someone from outside of government coming in, you always think, well, you know, fresh eyes, but really there's a complexity and depth to the federal government, just as it is in the UK, that an outsider, I think, doesn't really appreciate or, quite frankly, understand.
But I mean, so that might mean he will fail to deliver, but is the initial aim something that both sides can agree, or not really?
Well, not really, and because of the way that he's portrayed it. You know, I'm just going to come in here with a giant cleaver and start cutting. That's basically what he said. And everyone wants to talk about that. Everyone wants to make the federal government more lean and more accountable. But when you have someone who doesn't understand what the basic mission of the government is in the first place, there's going to be a lot of skepticism and I think not much support from the Democrats.
Let's talk about Rubio and Waltz in terms of likely Secretary of State and already confirmed or suggested National Security Advisor. What are their kind of politics? Are they outside of the political circle like Musk, or they're traditional political insiders, or not?
Well, it's interesting. Rubio tried to fashion himself son of Cuban immigrants. I'm the new generation. Then he quickly inserted himself as someone on the inside, on the middle. He was famously someone who went after Donald Trump in the 2016 campaign, failed miserably. He was Little Marco. Then he decided to pivot to becoming Trump's biggest supporter in the Senate. Mike Waltz is someone different. Mike is someone who's going to be an anti-China hawk, always been there. Not too sure where he is, for example, on Ukraine. But he's someone who has a little more policy depth to him. Rubio's never kind of shown any inclination to sort of get into the nitty-gritty. But he is someone who will carry out the mission of Donald Trump very well. And that's essentially what you see in all these appointments going forward.
Perhaps the most surprising, Elon Musk always grabs the headlines, but the most sort of attention-grabbing appointment is Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary. I mean, this is a huge department, some 3 million employees, depending on how you cut it. What's your view on that appointment?
Well, I would say that, you know, with just a few more years of experience in the military, he really doesn't have anything in terms of the ability to understand fighting men and women right now, the state of combat readiness. I think he's the one appointment that would run into some trouble in the Senate, even as is comprised right now, simply because being a talking head does not necessarily qualify you or me to run a vast...
Be careful what you say about television presenters.
Yes.
You know. So no, but it is an interesting appointment. But you know, he's obviously got 2 Bronze Stars, and I guess the question I have on this is: do you think that people across America believe President Trump has a mandate to make these sorts of appointments? I mean, clearly he's going to try to either way.
Right.
Do you think that that mandate exists?
I think the mandate certainly exists for him to do, as any president who enters office, to put his or her appointments forward and have them, confirmed by the United States Senate. What you have here is Trump is trying to avoid confirmation for many of these people, avoid public scrutiny on many of them. And to that extent, I think that the mandate isn't quite there for that. It's to serve, it's to go through the way government normally does things, which is they examine you or me and they determine whether or not we're fit for it. But he certainly has the right to put them forward. He will. I think the American people give every president a honeymoon, and it's only later when they decide, do they deliver, that the verdict comes in on, like, say, the midterm elections.
And just briefly to round things off, Rubio, if he is Secretary of State, will he be warm to the UK? Is he a Atlanticist or not?
I think he will be. I think that everyone who comes here, like including myself, is utterly charmed by the fact that this is a special relationship that we cannot possibly lose. And I think that he will be someone who will be a friend, I think, to the UK. NATO, not too sure.
Michael, as always, pleasure to catch up. Thanks so much for joining us. Michael Yaki, former senior advisor to Nancy Pelosi. Well, we're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll have all of the day's top stories, including highlights of our conversation with the Health Secretary.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
A very good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, as Russia increases its drone strikes on Ukraine, we report alongside the anti-aircraft teams attempting to defend the border.
Plus, Health Secretary Wes Streeting tells this programme he wants to change the culture of the NHS, giving away power and control as he outlines new reforms.
And we'll speak to the fastest 4-year-old in Britain who's dreaming of Formula One glory.
It's Wednesday, the 13th of November. Your headlines. Sky News goes inside eastern Ukraine with the defence units trying to down Russian drones.
They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians, so they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
Failing NHS hospitals to be named and shamed under new health reforms. Tech billionaire Elon Musk has handed a role in Donald Trump's top team. Pressure grows on the Church of England over child sex abuse claims as the Archbishop of Canterbury resigns, and plans to find social media bosses who don't remove adverts for illegal knives in the latest attempt to crack down on crime. A very good morning to you. The war in Ukraine we'll go to in just a moment. But first, underperforming NHS trusts across England are to be named and shamed as part of the Health Secretary's new measures to address poor performance. Wes Streeting's new zero tolerance for failure approach to the health system will also see NHS managers sacked if they don't turn things around. Earlier on the show, I asked Wes Streeting if he's been able to make all the changes he'd been hoping for.
A big part of what I'm announcing today is actually about giving away power and control, trusting great leaders, recognising great performance and letting go of central control. I genuinely think that's how we'll get better leadership, better management, more innovation. And as we do that, and as we put more resource and more power and more freedom to the front line, we will also be shrinking the centre, because I do think there is a legitimate criticism to be made that as new layers have been introduced in the NHS, we've had new things like integrated care systems, integrated care boards, we have not seen the centre shrink at the same time. The NHS has a culture of and more, and we need to start learning the words stop and or.
Let's speak to our political correspondent Mari Aurora about this. Mari, it is so fascinating hearing his perspective on this and those final words there, alongside, of course, boosting the funding for the NHS. And it's that sort of two-pronged approach that it just sounds very interesting from him.
It is interesting, and I think many people this morning will be quite excited by some of these reforms if they work. There is a little bit of fear or nervousness about this idea of a league table and the idea of kind of naming and shaming, as it were. But also, I think there's a little bit of nervousness around, in some of the information that the government has kind of given out overnight, it talks about how reforms will reward top-performing providers and give them more capital and greater control over where to invest. And I think there's a nervousness that if you are an already failing trust or provider, are you going to end up actually losing out on things that you potentially really need because you're already failing and therefore aren't eligible? Now, some would say, well, that would just incentivise you to do better, of course, and that's the plan, isn't it? But nonetheless, how long it takes for those improvements to come in that meantime, when you're losing that, not losing, but not gaining that cash, as it were, there'll be some nervousness around that. But really, what the Health Secretary is trying to outline this morning is finding ways to improve the NHS without always purely pumping money into it. We know that there's been a huge amount of cash injection in the NHS from the budget. It's quite heavily front-loaded as well. But nonetheless, that can't be enough. We saw in the election campaign Wes Streeting repeatedly saying no more money in the NHS without reform, and now he's making good on that promise. And let's also not forget, some of these reforms are really about the Lord Darcy report that came out, where essentially they found that actually the number of patients that were being treated had gone up by 3%, but the amount of resources had gone up by 20% in the NHS. And so there was this kind of mismatch between the amount of money and resources the NHS was getting in comparison to the productivity and the amount it was able to provide to patients. And that mismatch is causing frustration, and also then the waiting lists and the poorer care for some patients and certain areas, especially when it comes to a bit of a postcode lottery. So the government are really hoping that this is going to work. We know that realistically, at the next general election, feels like a long time away, but, you know, these things can come along quick, they will be judged on this. And if they don't improve things quite drastically, I think realistically within the next 12 months, they will be judged on that and very harshly.
It's one of those weeks where genuinely can't work out what the first topic of questioning will be on PMQs. There's a lot.
I know there's a lot. There's an ongoing debate about assisted dying. There's NHS Today. There's also knives and knife crime. And there's also...
Top fallout and President-elect Trump.
Exactly. There's also some pain around quite a few high street mortgage lenders increasing their fixed-rate mortgages despite the Bank of England cutting interest rates. And realistically, the Tories are going to argue that that's because of Rachel Reeves's budget and the fact that businesses are being scared, it's inflationary, and it could increase, and it has already potentially increased unemployment. So lots of options for the Tories.
Lots of options. Mari, for now, thank you very much. Of course, PMQs will be live here on Sky News at midday. As always, to the war in Ukraine now, where Russia has been deploying a record number of drones as Moscow shows a revival in its fight against Kiev. The US says North Korean troops are part of this resurgence in the conflict along the border, with soldiers actively engaged in the war. Meanwhile, Ukraine is keeping a close eye on President-elect Trump and how appointments to his cabinet could impact the military aid sent from the West. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has been in the region of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. And there, Ukrainian soldiers are tracking and attempting to shoot down Russian drones before they reach cities or power plants. Stuart spent 48 hours with the soldiers there and a warning that his report contains flash photography.
Every night, the tarpaulin covers are pulled off Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns and prepped for action. On battered trucks, they rumble into the night to take up defensive positions. The Russian drone attacks on Ukraine's cities and power plants are constant, and these old guns are the country's main defense against drones. The soldiers can track the drones, many supplied to Russia by Iran, on handheld tablets. This is modern warfare colliding with old-fashioned technology. They wait and listen and watch. In fields all around us, other units join the attack. In truth, only about 30% of the drones and missiles in this sector are actually shot down.
So the soldiers are picking up the shells that have been fired from the weapons at the passing missile. Reason for that is they don't want people to see that they've been firing from here. They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians. So they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
Captain Sergei of the 117th Brigade is in charge of 160 men in 8 mobile units protecting the southern sector of the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine, near the Russian border. Air raid sirens blare as he monitors the drones, and they're coming. We speed after him through checkpoints and along darkened roads. The drone is above us.
Lights off! Lights off in the car. Got the lights.
You can still hear the drone in the sky. They're trying to find it with searchlights. But another has got through.
We need a stronger, more automated air defense system that operates independently of human involvement.
It is absolutely relentless. An Iranian Shahid drone is flying over. They're tracking its flight, and they attack. These Ukrainian defenders, hundreds of them, will man the guns for another freezing night. The last line of defense. It's not good, but it's better than nothing. The Ukrainian military's dependence on foreign weaponry, particularly American, can't be underestimated. Hidden in a forest, they're repairing an American Bradley fighting vehicle. They haven't got enough of anything already. If Donald Trump cuts the supply, the Ukrainians will lose. It's that simple. Sasha Shershin is one of Ukraine's top field commanders. He's 30 years old. His 47th Battalion is fighting in the Russian territory of Kursk. Ukraine invaded in the summer. He's gloomy about his country's prospects, but he and his men will fight to the last.
I mean that situation is we have a lack of weapon, we have a lack of artillery, we have a lack of infantry, and other world don't care about the justice, you know, and they don't want to finish the war by our winning, you know. They're afraid Russia. I'm sorry, but they scare it. They scare it, and it's not the right way.
Along this 1,000-kilometre front line, there is a continuous movement of military vehicles going forward and ambulances coming back. Far behind the lines, miles inside Ukraine, new defensive positions are being built. An indicator, perhaps, of how this country is beginning to think.
I'm delighted to say that Stuart Ramsey joins us now live from eastern Ukraine. Stuart, just crossing the wires, Ukraine's Air Force says it shot down 4 missiles and 37 drones launched by Russia overnight. A headline that I imagine doesn't come as any great surprise to you, given where you've been and who you've been spending time with in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, no surprise at all. In fact, on Saturday is the largest number of drones ever fired against Ukraine or launched against Ukraine. That was on Saturday, and it's every night since. We've changed locations. We could hear the drones above us here as well. And it goes on and on. And as you say, it's not just drones, of course. It's other missiles as well that the Russians have been firing at Ukraine for a very long time. It's often, I mean, they definitely hit where ordinary people are living, but a lot of the time they're after infrastructure, power plants and the like, and the Russians have taken out a huge number of those. The capacity for creation of power in Ukraine is badly diminished, and it's not going to get any worse. And of course, we're getting into the winter now, so it's always going to be a difficult time. But yes, it's no surprise at all. As I say, these attacks are going on, and they will continue, no doubt about it.
And Stuart, talk to us about the level of morale and optimism that you see in the troops that you've been spending time with, and the extent to which those results in the US have influenced that.
Well, I think morale is quite good, but I don't think there's much optimism. We know the Russians are preparing, or we believe the Russians are preparing moves in the south. They're taking ground in the east, and they are determined to take back the Kursk region, which is what the Ukrainians took in the summer. As many as 50,000 soldiers are being lined up to take that battle to the Ukrainians. Ukrainian military is talking to them. The really big problem, I mean, they're short of everything. I said that in my report. Their real problem, though, is actual infantry. They're just running out of men. It's a terrible fact. It's just this war of attrition is killing an awful lot of young men. And the country is getting tired and worn out by this war. Certainly there's a large number of young men who don't want to fight in this war, and many have left the country. We know obviously millions have actually already left Ukraine. So they are in perhaps not dire situation, but it's really, really tough situation. And of course, what happens in the United States could have a direct effect on what happens to the Ukraine going forward. President Trump has said he'll end this war in a day, but he's going to have to get the two sides to meet and discuss. President Zelensky perhaps is the weakest hand, because without American military support, this defense of Ukraine just simply will fail. Putin, can he be pushed to it? Well, I suppose the new president could say, if you don't agree to discussions and to a ceasefire, then we will arm Ukraine to the teeth and allow them to attack inside Russia with long-range weapons. So that might be a way to get them to table. But both sides have to take part in this, of course. To come President Trump can only try to make a deal himself, but he can't force them to if they aren't going to play ball. But he does have, obviously, a lot of leverage over, to a degree, both sides. It's just whether they want to engage with him.
Is there hope of more support from Biden in the short term?
Yes, because he is. We understand that. I've heard a variety of figures from $6 to $9 billion of cash that has already been agreed to be sent to Ukraine. It's understood from the administration that that money will come through the system and that it will be supplied, and more armaments will be coming before President Biden's term is over. That will help, obviously. But it's the long term, you know. There's much more money needed than $6 billion, and it's much more about what the United States government's view on how long this should go on for. We know that Donald Trump in the past has said we're just not going to have these forever wars, and we know that his vice president has said exactly the same, and many Republicans are saying it just has to come to an end. So there is that general sense that they really want to find a negotiation to end this. They're hoping that both parties are prepared to agree and have those discussions so that it does come to an end sooner rather than later. But as I say, you've got two protagonists involved in this. It's not as easy as just saying this has to end and you just have to stop now. It just doesn't work like that.
Stuart Ramsey, as always, thanks so much. Time now for all of our day's other top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you very much, Wilfred. We're going to take viewers to Baku and COP29. It's day 3, and the big warning from scientists is that carbon emissions from fossil fuels will reach record levels this year. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, is there. Tom, give us a sense of the mood and what's on the agenda today.
Well, the view of the attendees, the delegates to this round of climate talks, is very much that this is perhaps the most consequential but also toughest round of talks since the Paris Agreement was made in 2015. That's what the world signed up to commit to keeping global warming below 2 degrees and as close to 1.5 degrees as possible, and that target is slipping now very much beyond reach, simply because the world's wealthiest countries, the world's fastest growing countries like China, are not cutting their emissions fast enough. Globally, they're still growing, as you were just saying, by about 1%. To get to 1.5 degrees or even 2, they need to fall by about 9% every year between now and 2050. What makes these talks tougher still is this is the one that's meant to be about money. How to finance projects that help rapidly developing countries move away from fossil fuels and help the poorest countries cope with the already dire consequences of global warming, changing climate, rising sea levels, increased storms and extreme weather events. No one can really agree on what that money should look like. The little bit that's been raised so far, I say little, it's $100 billion, not a trivial amount that's meant to be flowing every year. There's evidence that some of it's not going towards climate projects at all. There are too many strings attached. Some of them are in the form of loans, further adding to developing world debt, which is a major obstacle to progress. So there's a huge amount to work through. And the total that we're talking about here, and most countries agree on, is about $1.5, 1.3 to 1.4 trillion a year that needs to start flowing as soon as 2025, as soon as the end of next year, and continue to do so to reach more than 6 billion by 2030 to keep us on that track to 1.5 degrees. So it's a colossal challenge and a huge amount of negotiation, horse trading and arbitrage yet to go.
OK, Tom, thank you. That's Tom Clark, our science and technology editor in Baku for us. Back here, the teenager accused of murdering 3 girls at a Taylor Swift dance party is due to appear in court today. Axel Rubicana also faces 10 counts of attempted murder over July's mass stabbings in Southport. Well, last month, the 18-year-old was handed extra charges, including a terror offence based on evidence police say they found at his home. The Post Office may announce that it's closing dozens of branches in a cost-cutting drive as early as today. Under the plan, 115 loss-making branches wholly owned by the Post Office could be shut. Now, the group is also considering cutting 1,000 jobs at its head office. British author Samantha Harvey has won the Booker Prize with the novel Orbital, the first book set in space to win the prize. It was the biggest-selling book on this year's shortlist, about astronauts looking down at Earth from the International Space Station. And the Princess of Wales will host her annual Christmas Carol concert this year after completing treatment for cancer. Now, the service will be held at Westminster Abbey and will focus on the importance of love and supporting each other in the most difficult times.
Leah, as always, thank you. Now, the Shadow Climate Change and Net Zero Secretary Claire Coutinho is here in the studio with us to talk all things government-related today and get the Conservative perspective. Very good morning to you. Good
morning.
Let's start with what the government's announcing today. We had the Health Secretary on last hour, clearly wanting to make sure there is accountability with the extra spending that's going towards the NHS. Do you welcome that renewed drive for accountability?
Well, I mean, the reforms that he was announcing, we announced back in spring in terms of having accountability. And I think it's quite right, just as there's accountability in the private sector, that there's accountability in the public sector as well. The thing that I would say, and what we've been saying as the opposition now, is it's a funny way of going about it when you give people the money first and you negotiate on the reforms afterwards, because we had a productivity plan, we had a workforce plan that we worked up very closely with the NHS. It was welcomed by them, and Labour ditched that when they came in and then just sort of sprayed the cash, as it were. So I hope they get these reforms through. I think ultimately what we all want to see is improved services for patients, and I do think accountability is part of that.
But I mean, the extra spending that was announced in the budget by Rachel Reeves hasn't been given to the NHS yet, so it's not like they're handing the cash over and adding the sort of caveats to it afterwards.
Well, I mean, it would be very hard to see them rolling that back now, but let's see. And like I said, from my perspective, what I want to see is patients getting the best service possible. And I do think that accountability measures, the league table idea that, you know, as I said, we announced it back in spring. I do think that's important as well.
Are you glad to see that the Prime Minister was leading from the front at COP and at a time when a lot of other leaders of his rank, as it were, weren't attending?
Well, the thing that I'm worried about is that what he has done is he's gone and announced a new target, and he has not been clear at all about what this will mean for the British people. And actually, we have been leading from the front for many years. We're the only major economy to have halved emissions since 1990. And in that time, what you've seen is the US emissions have stayed the same. China's are up by 300%. So I would argue, before you are going further and faster with UK domestic targets, we need to be very honest about the trade-offs for the British people. And actually, if that's going to mean increased costs or more hardship, or, you know, punishing measures for industry, which means that they move abroad, then we need to look at that very carefully, because ultimately he's saying we want to be an example to the rest of the world. But if those things happened, you would be a warning, and actually nobody is going to follow your lead.
But I mean, do you support the fact that he did go in person and that we are continuing to aim to lead the world, as you framed it, in the rate of carbon emissions cuts?
Well, this is the point. If you're going to be world leading, we are 1% of global emissions. If you're going to be world leading, you want other people to follow your lead, correct? Now, if you are...
But that didn't happen over the 14 years you were in government. Do you still think that we should continue our fight and our momentum behind it?
So, again, this is the argument that I made in Post. I was brought in last year to do a reset on net zero and make sure this was reasonable for people. And I think living standards have to come first. This is the argument that I was making and have been making, that if you don't deliver cheap energy for your people, if you don't deliver a great quality of life, and you're cutting emissions here, and you know, your people are seeing emissions soaring in the rest of the world, then actually you're not solving the problem of global climate change. And also you're delivering hardship for the British people. And that's not right. So what I would like to see is a greater focus on the 99% of emissions that happen elsewhere. And I think the UK can play a really useful role, because we can innovate. We've got amazing companies that can produce goods, export them to the rest of the world, that don't have the same you know, capital skill system that we do. And that would have a much greater impact on climate change. And if I may, I think the thing that we're risking at the moment is, you know, Labour came into an election saying they were going to cut bills by £300. They've come up with this Clean Power 2030, which actually I'm really worried is going to make energy incredibly expensive in this country. And all you will see is our industry moving to countries like China, which are still 60% powered by coal. That's actually worse for carbon emissions.
But the pledge is still there to cut bills. Ed Miliband was on yesterday saying he wants to deliver both cleaner energy for the nation and lower bills. You know, we're 4 months in. We haven't seen bills go up relative to any of their plans yet. Obviously, bills did go
up by £150.
Yeah, but not relative to plans he's about to announce today. That's part of the cycle that was left off the back of your government. And bills went up significantly during the administration just passed. So I guess, you know, if this was in 5 years' time, you can say bills have gone up potentially, but you can't say it now.
Well, actually, the IFS have said that now. They said it after the last budget that green levies, which are policy costs which sit on people's bills, are going up over the Parliament. And that's thanks to the approach that the Labour Party are taking, which is to massively buy sort of into wind at I think, a pace faster than the market can deliver, which obviously is going to push up prices. So what I think is crucial is they came into that election with a £300 promise. We've not seen anything of it since. We actually had a vote in Parliament. Yeah, by 2030, we had a vote in Parliament to sign them up to the £300 promise by 2030, and actually they voted against it. So that promise has really fallen by the wayside. And actually, if you look at the report that was out last week, all the risks are that they are going to make energy much more, electricity in particular, much more expensive in this country. And that's something I think we should be deeply concerned about.
Well, the government obviously pushed back. I mean, they can't be measured on the £300 price target for 5 years' time yet. Switching focus, though, a little bit.
They could have voted for it.
They could have done. There's plenty of things that you didn't vote to bind yourself legally to when you were in government either. Pledges are different from binding laws. Touching on the US election and specifically how it affects your brief, clearly either way, and the government would agree with this, we're going to need gas for an extended period of time. Is there an opportunity to buy a lot of gas from the United States, liquid LNG that could be shipped over here? Or is it more sensible to take it from a nearby supplier, as we do already from Norway?
Well, so look, this is one of the other parts of their agenda, which I think is completely irrational, is that at the moment we get roughly 50% of our gas supply from the North Sea. So that's something which creates jobs in this country. It, you know,
is it that
creates.
High?
It's about 50%.
The majority is from Norway, is it not?
So no, we get about 50% from the North Sea. I mean, that is, you know, out of everything that's produced in the North Sea, domestic gas, all of that goes straight into our transmission gas networks. And actually, one of the myths I think that Ed sometimes says about gas is that automatically goes overseas. It doesn't. It goes straight into the UK gas transmission network. And then we get a big chunk from Norway as well. Now, the question that you want is, do you want to import more LNG? But that actually has 4 times the carbon emissions of our own domestic gas production. So if you're talking about trying to reduce carbon emissions, it makes no sense.
You wouldn't want to import from the US. You wouldn't do a deal with Donald Trump.
I wouldn't pick foreign imports of LNG, no matter where they were from, over domestic gas supply from the North Sea, which, again, like I said, brings in tax receipts. We know that actually their plans for the North Sea mean we'll get about £12 billion less in tax receipts over the Parliament. It supports 200,000 jobs. And like I said, it actually has lower emissions. Now, it doesn't make sense to shut that down in favour of importing gas from abroad.
2 more quick questions, if I may. Trump's team is taking shape as you see the appointments made. Does it add to concern you might have for his administration, what it means for the UK? Does it calm your nerves?
Well, look, from my perspective, in energy and net zero, what I really care about is what's going to happen to people's bills. So I'm very much focused on domestic, cheap energy. How do we get there? How can we make sure that we have a secure supply in this country? And, you know, as we always do in any government, we have to work with whoever's democratically elected to make sure that we can deliver on those key agendas. But in opposition, obviously, what we want to do is hold the Labour Party to account for their policies.
Is oil liquid gold in your book?
Well, look, like I said, we have the North Sea. Lots of countries around the world would love to have the North Sea. It supports 200,000 workers. And I think shutting down that resource, we're not going to need any less, we're not going to use any less. And shutting down that resource in favour of foreign imports is frankly quite mad.
And again, final question, important topic. Just wanted to get your view before we wrap things up. How are you going to vote in the assisted dying bill?
Well, look, I think that's going to be one of the hardest votes for many parliamentarians in their sort of lifetime in Parliament. I think it's a very tough subject. I mean, I've seen people in my family die in a very sort of long, drawn-out, painful way. But we have to make sure the safeguards are there if you think about the elderly, the sick, the vulnerable, disabled. So I will be reading it carefully and considering it carefully. But like I said, I think it's a very, very difficult choice for people.
Claire Coutinho, as always, thanks so much. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. Coming up, social media bosses could soon face big fines for failing to remove knife adverts. We'll speak to a mother whose son was killed by a blade bought online. And what's next for the Church of England as it faces pressure over child sex abuse scandal? We'll be right back.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse.
We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, as the government announces new plans to cut knife crime, we'll be speaking to Pooja Kanda, whose son was stabbed to death with a zombie knife bought online. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Underperforming NHS trusts. I'm here. I'm waiting. Underperforming NHS trusts will be named and shamed as part of a new government measure to tackle poor performance. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, told this show he wants to give more power and freedom to the front line of the health service. Russia has been deploying a record number of drones in Ukraine as Moscow shows a revival in its fight against Kyiv. Within the hour, Ukraine's Air Force has confirmed it shot down 4 missiles and 37 drones launched by Russia overnight. US President-elect Donald Trump has announced that Elon Musk will lead a new Department of Government Efficiency. Mr. Trump said Musk's appointment would help cut wasteful expenditures and restructure federal agencies.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, we'll get the latest on the US appointments being made by President-elect Donald Trump now, announcing that Elon Musk will lead the Department of Government Efficiency, as Leah just mentioned, when he takes over. The president-elect says the world's richest man will join Vivek Ramaswamy in that post and will advise from outside of government. Here is our US correspondent Mark Stone's take.
Well, quite the flurry of announcements from Mar-a-Lago from President-elect Donald Trump overnight about the type of people he will surround himself with in a second presidency. We knew earlier in the day that Marco Rubio is likely to be the US Secretary of State. That is America's top diplomat. But as it would turn out, that was the most conventional of all the announcements that were to come, because it has now been confirmed that Elon Musk will be the head of a new government Department of Efficiency that will, oddly, we don't understand quite how this works, but oddly sit outside government. That may be because Elon Musk is in charge of several companies who have massive government contracts, which prevents him from working within government, but somehow they've fudged it, and so he will sit outside government, heading up this Department of Government Efficiency alongside Vivek Ramaswamy. Donald Trump has said overnight, "I look forward to Elon and Vivek making changes to the federal bureaucracy with an eye on efficiency and at the same time making life better for all Americans." He goes on to say, "Importantly, we will drive out the massive waste and fraud which exists throughout our annual $6.5 trillion of government spending." So that is those two characters having a central role, albeit outside of government, but certainly looking at government efficiency in a Trump second term, something that Donald Trump has promised that he would do with Elon Musk's help. The other announcement, or two more announcements. One, the US ambassador to Israel has been announced. That is Mike Huckabee. And he is a man who is incredibly pro-Israel. He has said in the past that the West Bank does not exist, that settlements do not exist, that the Palestinians, if they want their own state, should perhaps move somewhere else. So I think there we can see the direction of travel in terms of the way that Trump would like to mould the Middle East and the peace process there, and any chance for a two-state solution seem distant indeed with Mike Huckabee in charge. And then perhaps the most interesting of all the announcements, Pete Hegseth, who is a Fox News host, is to become US Defense Secretary. He is a well-known figure on Fox News. He is a veteran as well, served in the military in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo Bay, where he defended the treatment of inmates there. Yes, he is to be the new US Defense Secretary in charge of the most powerful military in the world.
Mark Stone there for us in Washington. Now, social media bosses who fail to remove adverts of illegal knives from their platforms could face fines of up to £10,000 as part of a proposal being considered by the government to halve knife crime in the next decade. Alice Porter joins us now with a bit more detail on this, Alice. So this is going to be targeting in particular the executives at these companies.
Yeah, and in particular, this is the issue around illegal knives. So this isn't your day-to-day cooking knives. These are illegal knives. There's a whole list of them on the government website. These are knives that we've heard of often in association with awful killings, like sort of zombie knives. These are all illegal in the first place, but it's understood that they are relatively routinely being advertised on social media websites, on online platforms, and this is something that the government really wants to tackle. And their plan is that police would be empowered to issue warnings to senior officials at online companies and demand that specific adverts would be removed, potentially within 2 days. And if that wasn't done within 2 days, then a senior executive at the company could be personally liable for a fine, which sounds significant, but of course there's been huge problems over the years with trying to fine social media companies for all sorts of things. And crucially, many social media companies, they don't have their headquarters here in the UK. But this is all part of Labour's plan to try and halve knife crime over the next decade or so. That's very much their push to be doing this. But there are, of course, real difficulties, and we've got the Online Safety Act that's coming into effect, which is certainly hoping that social media companies will hold greater responsibility for their online platforms. So it's strong headlines that we're seeing today, but I think very much the devil is in the detail of how this is actually going to happen in the first place.
Alice, thanks so much for that perspective, as always. Well, we're going to stay with this topic, and the consultation will be published today, as Alice has been mentioned. to decide the definition and description of ninja-style swords, which will mark the first step towards then taking all of the action that Alice just outlined. Well, we're joined now by Pooja Kanda, whose son Ronan was stabbed to death with a 22-inch sword bought online. Pooja, thank you so much for joining us and to add your perspective, your important perspective on this. And just to remind our viewers, if you don't mind, for those that don't know, what did happen to Ronan and when?
In 2022, Ronan was just walking outside the house, 2 doors away from our house, and these 2 perpetrators ran behind him and they stabbed him in his abdomen from back. And then when he turned around, he felt the pain. He turned around, they stabbed him in his heart, 18 inches deep. That sword went through his heart. And then he just dropped and died. He didn't stand a chance.
And this sword, this dangerous weapon, was bought online?
Yes. It was bought online by the 2 16-year-old who paid it from the fake ID and also used their mother's bank card and collected it on the day from the post office without the ID checks. And there was no one there to stop them. There was nothing there to stop them from getting it. It was so easy for them to get it.
Pooja, it's Leah here in the studio. Thanks so much for talking to us today on this. Your strength as a mother is quite incredible. I just wonder if you could tell viewers how you're using Ronan's memory to try and drive the narrative for the better. Do you think we're on the right road? Do you think the government have a handle on this?
I would like to think the government is got the handle on it. I would like to think that, because it is a beginning, and I do know that they are doing more than the previous government. They are speaking with us face to face. We have got coalition. We go and we tell them where all the organisation failures are, which we were not heard before. So it's not just me, myself, who's going there. The other families are part of this coalition as well. And they did say they're going to do the ninja sword ban, and they are keeping their words today. And I hope that they could carry on doing more and more to fight this crime.
And specifically this measure that we've been talking about today, to hold the executives of social media companies accountable if there are adverts on their platforms for these sorts of weapons. Is that something that you're positively surprised by, even by the government?
We wanted that to happen, but I'm glad the government has taken the initiative and done something much more than I expected. So yes, I'm surprised and I'm grateful for that. And it is very important that we do hold these social companies, these social media companies hold, like there shouldn't be any type of weapons advertised on these platforms. We should feel safe, but obviously we're not. They're becoming nobody's monitoring them. So
Pooja, why is it so important for you to talk about Ronan's memory? You have a tattoo, don't you, of his heartbeat on your arm with the words that you're proud of him. There it is. Why is it important for you to talk about what happened to him?
Because when I sat last year in the court case, and all I saw, that there was no one was able to stop this murderer, this 16-year-old, for becoming a murderer. And my son did not stand a chance. So that means if I didn't speak, this will continue. This behavior will continue. And then I would have to see my child gone and other children going in front of my eyes. And that's because I didn't raise voice. So I just wish somebody did that for me. Maybe my son would have been here today.
Well, Pooja, I have no doubt that your son's memory and your actions since have played a significant part in in the action we're seeing from government and that we're discussing now. And we thank you for joining us to share your story.
Thank you.
Pooja Kanda there joining us. Now, there's growing pressure on the Church of England to find out who knew what and when about a prolific child abuser within the church. It follows the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury after a report ruled he could and should have told police about the actions of John Smythe, who abused as many as 130 boys and young men at Christian summer camps. Our communities correspondent Lisa Holland has this report.
Having presided over the crowning of King Charles, in disgrace, Justin Welby sought the monarch's permission to resign. He was brought down by his own failings to respond adequately to the decades-long abuse of children and young men by this man, John Smythe, and deep-seated wider concerns within the Church of England over safeguarding. In a statement, Justin Welby said, "The Makin Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smythe. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. I must take personal and institutional responsibility. I hope this decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change." Now 64 and a retired teacher, Richard Gittins was one of John Smythe's dozens of victims. He says the resignation of Justin Welby should be just the start of the road to justice for him and many others.
I'm pleased he's resigned. It now shows that he's taken some action, and I think it also means that the focus can be turned on other people who knew and haven't done anything about it. Although he's the highest person in the church, he's not the most responsible for the cover-up. So I think it's time now to focus attention on other bishops who kept the stories to themselves.
For days there's been pressure from within the Church of England for Justin Welby to go. He refused. But criticism, when it came from leading bishops, could no longer be ignored.
Safeguarding is a barometer of the health of the culture of the church. And if we're getting that wrong, then we are failing in who we are, who we should be as a church. We are about the gospel of good news for the poor, the broken-hearted, those who are hurting. And it's really clear that we failed by allowing that abuse to happen and by allowing it to be covered up. And so, yeah, I feel deep shame.
The former Victims Commissioner Dame Vera Baird sees the resignation of Justin Welby as a watershed moment for the church.
I think he's done absolutely the right thing, but it is insufficient. Let's be real, he had a very short time left in office because he'd reached the retirement age, so it's insufficient for victims.
Do you think there needs to be a different way for child abuse to be investigated in the Church of England?
Oversight of the safeguarding and the investigations must be done totally outside of the hierarchy of the Anglican Church. It is very straightforward. They should engage with some of the well-known child abuse and adult abuse charities.
Change is coming at Lambeth Palace, the official residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. But after a tumultuous week, the Church of England needs to show it can keep those in its communities safe. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, he's more than a decade away from getting his driver's licence, but next we'll meet the little petrol head who's on the road to becoming a Formula One champion already.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure.
Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. Well, he's only just started school, but Rafe Verdi is Britain's youngest racing driver. The 4-year-old is on the road to becoming a Formula One champion already, and I'm delighted to say that he is here now alongside his parents, Amardeep and Lionel. A very good morning to you all. Rafe, it's so great to have you here with us. And thank you so much for joining us. Tell us why you love cars and driving and racing so much.
I saw some fast cars.
When you were even younger, you saw some fast cars and loved them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I kind of love fast cars and watching them, but I'm not very good at driving them. But you love driving them?
Yeah, I started on an electric go-kart.
Oh, wow. And that's what you started on, and that's what you're still driving and practicing?
I was going around a table when I was in my electric go-kart.
And so that was going around the house at home, but we've seen some videos. We've got a picture of you as well, I think at Silverstone. So you now drive them outside and you're practicing
Yes.
proper racing?
Yes.
And is that fun or is it scary?
Fun.
Yeah.
Rafe, what do your friends think about how good you are?
I think I'm fast.
And Lionel, tell us in terms of the road from here, because at 4, how much is he actually allowed to race yet? I guess legally, but also based on the rules I'm sure you guys have to impose.
Yes, so we managed to find an academy, MPH Academy, who were able to take Rafe on the track in a petrol go-kart at 4. Obviously, the insurance is always a little bit of a stumbling block. So, yeah, we managed to find someone. And, this year has been practising in the petrol carts. Started with a micro Bambino, so the top speed was about 26. So as soon as he turned 4, he was doing 26 miles an hour and really enjoying it. And, yeah, the engine's increased in size, and he's up to 40 miles an hour and sort of whizzing around quite quickly now.
Do you think much about the future? Because if we look at F1 drivers now, you've got Max Verstappen. He started karting when he was 4. And, you know, Lewis Hamilton, very similar. Do you think about that, Amandeep?
A lot of them are driving at a younger age, and I think if you can get them in a car earlier, they pick up the skills a lot better, and it's good practice for them before they actually start competing. So we think it's a nice age to start, and most importantly, he's enjoying it. So, you know, there's a fun element and actually a learning element as well.
Rafe, are you enjoying watching the videos of you driving? do you wish you were back on the track rather than here with us?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you drive every day, once a week? Is it your favourite thing?
Every day.
Every day. And do you think your friends, because it's not typical, is it, for kids your age? Your friends quite envious? Do they wish they were racing like you were?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you think that this is what you dream of doing for the rest of your life? Do you want to be a Formula One driver?
Yes.
Who's your favourite driver?
Charles Leclerc.
Charles Leclerc. And is that why you like Ferrari?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but do you know who's other Ferrari driver next year?
Carlos Sainz.
Carlos Sainz. Lewis.
Yeah, Lewis.
Look at this. Unbelievable knowledge. And who do you think your favourite is for next year? Leclerc or Hamilton?
Leclerc.
Still Leclerc.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard sport, isn't it, to get into?
Yes.
And do you think you're going to work super hard to try and make it happen?
Yes.
And is this my helmet or your helmet?
My helmet.
This looks pretty big. It's pretty big. It's quite heavy, that, is it?
It has my name on it.
It does. It's very smart. And
I can only see it.
it's going to be a really hard task to get there, but do you ever get scared? Because it's a dangerous sport as well.
No.
No? Just fun?
Yeah.
Just fun?
I think, Rafe, you've got it covered.
I think he's got it covered as well.
Absolutely. It's so wonderful, isn't it, to be able to help children flourish in something that they love. Is that important, just to keep this going?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, Rafe's got a real enthusiasm and passion for particularly Formula One, F2 as well. And it's something that we just like any parent, want to nurture any talent that he may have. So, yeah,
well, Lionel, Amardeep and Rafe, we thank you so much for joining us. Rafe in particular, and good luck.
Thank you.
Going forward.
Thank you very much.
We're out of time. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, the Health Secretary announces reforms to the NHS, introducing league tables and sacking underperforming staff.
Yes, well, Wes Streeting tells this programme he wants to give more power and freedom to the front line of the health service.
And do they know it's Christmas? Do we know it's Christmas? The voices of Band Aid, past and present, they come together for the 40th anniversary.
It's Wednesday, the 13th of November. Your headlines. Failing NHS hospitals to be named and shamed under new health reforms. Sky News goes inside eastern Ukraine, reporting alongside the anti-aircraft teams attempting to down Russian drones.
They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians, so they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
Tech billionaire Elon Musk has handed a role in Donald Trump's top team. Pressure grows on the Church of England over child sex abuse accusations as the Archbishop of Canterbury resigns. And plans to find social media bosses who don't remove adverts for illegal lives in the latest attempt to crack down on crime. A very good morning to you. Underperforming NHS trusts across England are to be named and shamed as part of the Health Secretary's new measures to address poor performance. Wes Streeting's new zero tolerance for failure approach to the health system will also see NHS managers sacked if they don't turn things around. Well, earlier on the show, I asked Streeting if he's been able to make all the changes he'd been hoping for.
A big part of what I'm announcing today is actually about giving away power and control, trusting great leaders, recognising great performance and letting go of central control. I genuinely think that's how we'll get better leadership, better management, more innovation. And as we do that, and as we put more resource and more power and more freedom to the front line, we will also be shrinking the centre, because I do think there is a legitimate criticism to be made that as new layers have been introduced in the NHS, we've had new things like integrated care systems, integrated care boards. We have not seen the centre shrink at the same time. The NHS has a culture of and more, and we need to start learning the words stop and or.
Let's speak to our political correspondent, Mari Aurora, about this. Now, it's an interesting sort of two-pronged approach to this. Yeah. More money, but here are the caveats. Here's how you're going to be held to account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the government are really trying to find a way to inject that cash into the NHS in a kind of immediate way from the budget so that things can improve quite quickly. They are very, very hyper aware, really, that they have to start to really improve people's day-to-day experiences when it comes to interacting with the NHS and healthcare providers. Otherwise, they are going to be accused of kind of injecting more money and nothing is changing. So they want to, inject that cash and make sure that trusts are able to recruit, retain, etc., get the equipment they need. Simultaneously, though, they also are aware of how much the NHS budget has gone up, has often got massive injections of cash, and many would say rightly so, but that the productivity or that the quality of care hasn't always reflected that increase in resources and budgets. And that was what was found in the Lord Darzi report, which is one of the reasons we're seeing some of these reforms now. And so what they're saying is it's time to really reward those who are doing really well, doing a great job and setting a great example, and actually it's time to really get tough with those who are failing and sack those managers that are failing and have a bit more of a almost slightly more private sector style approach to staff and success/failure. And it all sounds great. Some people have always argued that the idea of a league table system for healthcare is not going to work because it's not the same as, for instance, education. We see league tables are really helpful in education because you cannot choose necessarily which hospital you go to in the way that you can choose which university you might go to, for instance. And so some people are going to say, actually, is this going to help if you still haven't got the choice? You can just see that the hospital on your doorstep is not great, but you still have to go there. Other people would say this is going to give more power and an agency to patients who can actually see where to get the best treatment, and also then the pressure of that kind of public shaming could then increase the pressure on people to actually do a better job, in theory.
Quite a lot of potential topics for PMQs today.
Yes, absolutely. So this could be one of them. We've also got announcements about knife crime and cracking down on social media bosses for not being strict enough on kind of banning the sale and advertisement of zombie knives, ninja knives, etc. But also we saw yesterday fixed-rate mortgage rates going up despite a Bank of England cut in interest rate, in the base rate, and that is realistically as a direct result to an extent of Rachel Reeves's budget. So that could be something we could see the Tories easily kind of use as an Achilles heel for the Labour Party.
All right, great stuff as always. Thank you. To the war in Ukraine now, where Russia has been deploying a record number of drones as Moscow shows a revival in its fight against Kiev. This morning, Ukraine's Air Force confirmed it shot down 4 missiles and 37 drones launched by Russia overnight. Meanwhile, Ukraine is keeping a close eye on President-elect Trump and how appointments to his cabinet could impact the military aid sent from the West. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has been in the region of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. There, Ukrainian soldiers track and attempt to shoot down Russian drones before they reach cities or power plants. Stuart spent 48 hours with the soldiers and a warning that his report contains flash photography.
Every night, the tarpaulin covers are pulled off Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns and prepped for action. On battered trucks, they rumble into the night to take up defensive positions. The Russian drone attacks on Ukraine's cities and power plants are constant, and these old guns are the country's main defense against drones. The soldiers can track the drones, many supplied to Russia by Iran, on handheld tablets. This is modern warfare colliding with old-fashioned technology. They wait and listen and watch. In fields all around us, other units join the attack. In truth, only about 30% of the drones and missiles in this sector are actually shot down.
So the soldiers are picking up the shells that have been fired from the weapons at the passing missile. Reason for that is they don't want people to see that they've been firing from here. They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians. So they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
Captain Serhey of the 117th Brigade is in charge of 160 men in 8 mobile units protecting the southern sector of the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine, near the Russian border. Air raid sirens blare as he monitors the drones, and they're coming. We speed after him through checkpoints and along darkened roads. The drone is above us.
Lights off! Lights off in the car. Got the lights.
You can still hear the drone in the sky. They're trying to find it with searchlights. But another has got through.
We need a stronger, more automated air defense system that operates independently of human involvement.
It is absolutely relentless. An Iranian Shahid drone is flying over. They're tracking its flight, and they attack. These Ukrainian defenders, hundreds of them, will man the guns for another freezing night. The last line of defense. It's not good, but it's better than nothing. The Ukrainian military's dependence on foreign weaponry, particularly American, can't be underestimated. Hidden in a forest, they're repairing an American Bradley fighting vehicle. They haven't got enough of anything already. If Donald Trump cuts the supply, the Ukrainians will lose. It's that simple. Sasha Shershin is one of Ukraine's top field commanders. He's 30 years old. His 47th Battalion is fighting in the Russian territory of Kursk. Ukraine invaded in the summer. He's gloomy about his country's prospects, but he and his men will fight to the last.
I mean that situation is we have a lack of weapon, we have a lack of artillery, we have a lack of infantry, and other world don't care about the justice, you know, and they don't want to finish the war by our winning, you know. They're afraid Russia. I'm sorry, but they scare it. They scare it, and it's not the right way.
Along this 1,000-kilometre front line, there is a continuous movement of military vehicles going forward and ambulances coming back. Far behind the lines, miles inside Ukraine, new defensive positions are being built. An indicator, perhaps, of how this country is beginning to think.
Well, delighted to say that Stuart joins us now from eastern Ukraine. And Stuart, talk to us about the level of morale and optimism of the soldiers that you've been spending time with.
I think the morale is good in as much as that they are very committed, they're defending their country, and they're determined to continue fighting. Optimism, I think, is somewhat in short supply. Much like the infantry, for that matter, and that really is the big problem. They're short of everything you can think of. They need more weapons, they need more support. They would like to be able to fire long-range weapons into Russia, but at the moment they can't. But the real crucial thing, and this is coming from a number of commanders we spoke to, is the number of men they are missing. They just don't have enough infantry, and of course the Russian forces are huge. We know, for example, in Kursk, this is a region that Ukraine took in Russia itself, as many as 50,000 soldiers, including North Korean soldiers, are gathering together to try to get Kursk back. Now, that's just a huge number if you think about it. We know in the east the Russians have been gaining territory. It's not hugely quickly, but it is a constant, if you like. They just can't seem to stop them. Again, it's weight of numbers. And preparing more forces in the south as well to push, we believe. That's the intelligence reports that we've been seeing over the last day. That has always been the problem for Ukraine, that even if the Russian army wasn't particularly good, it's just its size is something that Ukraine, without the support of the West, simply can't take on. I was talking to one of the commanders who made a very good point. He was saying that at the beginning of the war, the Russians really were poor, and the Ukrainians were better. They might have been outnumbered, but they were better at it. But the Russians have learned from that, this commander was telling me, and basically have become a much better fighting force themselves. So if you've got those two almost nightmare scenarios, or three if you like, that they've got the numbers, they've got better, and the West, and particularly the United States, support appears to waver, then you really are, well, there's no grounds for optimism under those circumstances, because if that dries up, and if Trump was to just say, you're not getting any more weapons, that really would be it. And I don't know, they wouldn't be able to hold out for very long.
Talk to us, Stuart, about the views of the soldiers you spent time with towards both Biden and Trump, and how they assess the scale of support they've had thus far, and I guess their fears that it may dry up, as you just warned the consequences would be.
Well, it's actually really interesting, isn't it? Because we know that sort of politically, on social media, politicians talking, and a general view that the continuation of the Biden administration under Harris would be the best case scenario for Ukraine. But actually, quite a lot of the soldiers and politicians here have actually, particularly the politicians, have found the Biden administration quite difficult to deal with. There's been delays in the supply of arms. They won't allow the firing of long-range weapons. And so they've been somewhat exasperated by Biden. And what you wouldn't expect is actually there's a sort of optimism amongst them that Trump might not actually be as bad as all that, because the view is that he wouldn't want to appear weak in front of Putin. And so if he wants to get them to the negotiating table,
he may actually say to Putin, you actually have to do this, because if you don't, we're going to really supply the Ukrainians with everything they need and more, and give them permission to use the weapons in a way they haven't been allowed to do so far. So that's sort of, if you like, the optimistic take that Trump, although in the past he said this is going to end in a day, we can't have forever wars. We know the vice presidential pick is also saying you can't have forever wars, it's costing a fortune. That was the view. But maybe if it comes down to negotiation, he can actually take the side of Ukraine. That's what the people, soldiers particularly here, are hoping for, if they're on the optimistic side.
Fascinating, as always, Stuart. Thanks so much. Time now to get all of your day's other top stories, including some updates on the US President-elect's administration. Leah's got those for us.
Yeah, we're hearing more details of who will make it to the top table at Donald Trump's administration in January. Elon Musk has been called up. He will lead the Department of Government Efficiency when he takes over the Oval Office. The president-elect says the world's richest man will join Vivek Ramaswamy in the post, and that will advise from outside of government. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
Well, quite the flurry of announcements from Mar-a-Lago from President-elect Donald Trump overnight about the type of people he will surround himself with in a second presidency. We knew earlier in the day that Marco Rubio is likely to be the US Secretary of State. That is America's top diplomat. But as it would turn out, that was the most conventional of all the announcements that were to come, because it has now been confirmed that Elon Musk will be the head of a new government Department of Efficiency that will, oddly, we don't understand quite how this works, but oddly sit outside government. That may be because Elon Musk is in charge of several companies who have massive government contracts, which prevents him from working within government, but somehow they've fudged it, and so he will sit outside government, heading up this Department of Government Efficiency alongside Vivek Ramaswamy. Donald Trump has said overnight, I look forward to Elon and Vivek making changes to the federal bureaucracy with an eye on efficiency and at the same time making life better for all Americans. He goes on to say, importantly, we will drive out the massive waste and fraud which exists throughout our annual $6.5 trillion of government spending. So that is those two characters having a central role, albeit outside of government, but certainly looking at government efficiency in a Trump second term, something that Donald Trump has promised that he would do with Elon Musk's help. The other announcement, or two more announcements. One, the US ambassador to Israel has been announced. That is Mike Huckabee. And he is a man who is incredibly pro-Israel. He has said in the past that the West Bank does not exist, that settlements do not exist, that the Palestinians, if they want their own state, should perhaps move somewhere else. So I think there we can see the direction of travel in terms of the way that Trump would like to mould the Middle East and the peace process there, and any chance for a two-state solution seem distant indeed with Mike Huckabee in charge. And then perhaps the most interesting of all the announcements, Pete Hegseth, who is a Fox News host, is to become US Defense Secretary. He is a well-known figure on Fox News. He is a veteran as well, served in the military in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo Bay, where he defended the treatment of inmates there. Yes, he is to be the new US Defense Secretary in charge of the most powerful military in the world.
And remember to scan the QR code. It's on the screen right now. You can listen to the latest episode of The World with Richard and Yauda. And this week, they're talking about Donald Trump's emerging foreign policy and what it might mean for the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. The teenager accused of murdering 3 girls at a Taylor Swift dance party is due to appear in court. Axel Rubicana also faces 10 counts of attempted murder over July's mass stabbings in Southport. Last month, the 18-year-old was handed extra charges, including a terror offence based on evidence police say they found at his home. And some breaking news now. The Post Office has this morning confirmed it's closing dozens of branches in a cost-cutting drive. Under the plan, 115 loss-making branches wholly owned by the Post Office will be shut. The group is also considering cutting 1,000 jobs at its head office. More on that later. British author Samantha Harvey has won the Booker Prize with the novel Orbital, the first book set in space to win the prize. It was the biggest-selling book on this year's shortlist, about astronauts looking down on Earth from the International Space Station. And the Princess of Wales will host her annual Christmas Carol concert this year after completing treatment for cancer. Now, the service, which is held at Westminster Abbey, will focus on the importance of love and supporting each other in the most difficult times.
Yeah, great stuff, thank you. A little bit of breaking news now, and you'll remember the immediate sacking of hundreds of P&O ferry workers back in 2022. The company fired 800 staff and replaced them with cheaper foreign agency workers. Well, we've got an update for you on that story, some extra breaking news. Paul Kelso's got it for us. Paul, what can you tell us?
Yeah, the financial position of P&O was always cited by the company as the reason it carried out what's regarded as probably the most ruthless act of corporate restructuring in recent history, that sacking of almost 800 seafarers. Well, the accounts for 2022, when that happened, are long overdue. I've seen a copy of those accounts. They've now been filed with Companies House, not yet publicly published, and they reveal that the cost of that restructuring, the corporate euphemism for what was a summary sacking without any recourse to notice or to consultation, cost P&O £47 million. It's cited in the accounts as a one-off restructuring fee of £47 million to shed those nearly 800 seafarers. Effectively, overnight, they were summoned to meetings on board ships. Some of them, a video message, they were told they were sacked and out the door immediately. Some were escorted off with their belongings. They were replaced by largely foreign agency workers who were earning as little as £4.87 an hour rather than the minimum wage required under the deals with unions the British seafarers were on. That was all part of an attempt to try and save P&O, and these accounts reveal quite how deep a hole it was in. The previous year, it had recorded a loss of £375 million. Well, as a result, in part because of those sackings, losses were cut in 2022 to £249 million. And the accounts say the company is now on a, quote, transformational journey and it expects to record a profit before tax this year for the first time. These accounts do reveal quite how deep the hole was. The company is only a going concern, that's the accountancy term for viability, because of huge levels of loans from its parent company DP World. They total more than £360 million now. It's got some new ships that it commissioned and put on its cross-channel routes. Well, one of them it had to sell to a foreign subsidiary, a French subsidiary, and then lease back to clear some external debt. So the company was in a deep hole. They reasoned the only way out of it was this ruthless sacking process that remains hugely controversial. You'll remember last month Sky News revealed that criticism of P&O from Louise Haigh, the new Transport Secretary, prompted DP World to actually reconsider a £1 billion investment in the port at London Gateway. Well, that political storm blew over. The money will go in. But these accounts reveal, I think P&O will say, why they were justified, why the ends justified the means in these sackings to try and turn the company around. Of course, plenty, not just in the cabinet, in the union movement, and perhaps some consumers will always disagree.
Paul, how does sacking people, 800, a big number, but how does sacking people cost £47 million? Is that including the cost of the new people they hired, the agency workers? It's the PR that they had to spend on spinning this decision that attracted such negativity?
It's essentially, as far as the accounts let us know, my understanding, that £47 million is a combination of the cost of the payoffs and the legal fees and the use of consultants that were involved in that decision. It is effectively just the money that was required to get people off the books immediately. Under employment law, if P&O had adhered to it, they would have had to run a consultation process and work to establish the proper level of payoff. By ignoring employment law, it actually forced them to pay at the upper end of what was required. The sources close to the company told me that some of the payoffs were in six figures, so some people receiving more than £100,000 in payoffs. There was no cap on the upper limit of the payoffs, and everyone, even if they just arrived on their first shift, received at least £1,500. So it may be that that total of £47 million could have been lower if P&O had stuck to the rules. What it allowed them to do was to bring in much, much cheaper staff immediately. Of course, it did cost them a month of sailings while they put this into place. That is another reason the company was in such a hole that it says it is now climbing out of, in part because of its decision to sack so many people without due process.
Paul, thanks so much. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, will the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury bring a change to the Church of England? We'll discuss that. Plus, what will a Donald Trump presidency mean for the war in Ukraine? We'll speak to Russia's former ambassador to the UN for analysis, and "40 years on, Band Aid to release a new version of this Christmas classic."
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse.
We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. There's growing pressure on the Church of England to find out who knew what and when about a prolific child abuser within the church. It follows the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury after a report ruled he could and should have told police about the actions of John Smythe, who abused as many as 130 boys and young men at Christian summer camps. Joining me now is Justin Humphreys. He's Chief Executive at 318, an independent Christian safeguarding charity in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us on this. First, are you surprised or not that Welby ultimately decided to resign?
Well, I'm not sure that that's an easy question to answer, and I'm not sure it's helpful at this point. But I think what I would say is that now that he has, we do seem to have, for the Church of England, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make some real progress. And his resignation can't actually cause any further delay, or shouldn't cause further distraction, shouldn't derail the process that's already underway. So the fact that he's resigned may be providing a critical opportunity just now.
What sort of change are you talking about that you need and want to see?
Well, there are a whole raft of changes that need to be seen: cultural change, change in resource, change in focus, the need to put victims and survivors genuinely first and at the heart of the considerations that the Church of England makes. And of course, then there's the really big question that's still hanging out there, which General Synod in February has to answer, which is, what does true independence in safeguarding look like for the Church of England, including what independent external scrutiny ought to look like.
And do you have clear views on that?
Yes, I do. I believe that there is a real need for independent external scrutiny from a completely third-party organisation that has teeth, that has mandate, that is underpinned by law to hold the Church of England to account for effective safeguarding practice, and that it actually has the ability to intervene, either to bring about change or to provide support where that's necessary. I think the Church of England has continued for long enough without those checks and balances in place, and I think it's unanimously agreed that this is what's needed.
You said at the top that the resignation of Welby allows a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this sort of change. Was he resisting this sort of change?
Well, look, if Justin Welby is to be believed in the interview that he undertook earlier this week, he is claiming responsibility for having brought in the significant changes that have been seen in the Church of England in recent times. So I suppose part of the concern would be, if that is the case, now that he has stepped down, who is going to pick up the mantle? Is there somebody behind Justin Welby who is prepared and able to push forward the continued implementation of change? That's the critical question for me. Who is that person? Does that person have support? And what is it that they intend to do next?
So just clarify for us, so you actually, are you saying you celebrate the changes that Welby was ushering in previously?
Well, I think many changes have been made, including a significant increase in resource around the safeguarding piece, certainly centrally. Training has been put in place, but there is an awful long way to go. And that's not just for the Church of England, that's across the Church in all its traditions and expressions. So there's never any room for complacency. Of course, I welcome any genuine change and improvement, but that cannot lead us to sit on our laurels.
How long does it take to appoint a new archbishop? Who leads that process? And do you think that the type of change you want to see will only ultimately arrive once there's a new archbishop in place?
Well, I'm told that the process can be quite extensive. So maybe 6 months before we hear anything really useful about who might replace Justin Welby. I'm not an expert in that area. But what I would say is that I would really, really hope to see that those who are responsible for making the decision and the appointment have safeguarding as a critical element of that person's capability and willingness. So any absence of an appetite to put safeguarding front and centre, I think, is a huge red flag at this point.
Justin Humphreys, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, what will a Donald Trump presidency mean for the war in Ukraine? We'll speak to Russia's former ambassador to the UN for analysis. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, what does Donald Trump's election mean for the war in Ukraine? We'll be speaking to Boris Bondarev, who worked for the Russian permanent mission to the UN. But first, a reminder of all the day's top headlines. Here's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Some breaking news, actually, in the last few minutes, and the Post Office has confirmed that 115 branches, well, they're at risk of closure in a cost-cutting drive. The move could affect around 1,000 workers and hundreds of jobs are under threat. Underperforming NHS trusts are to be named and shamed. It's part of a new government measure to tackle poor performance. The Health Secretary Wes Streeting told this programme he wants to give more power and freedom to the front line of the health service. And US President-elect Donald Trump has announced that Elon Musk will lead a new Department of Government Efficiency. Mr. Trump said the appointment would help cut wasteful expenditures.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Russia has been deploying a record number of drones towards Ukraine. Just a few hours ago, Ukraine's Air Force confirmed it downed 4 missiles and 37 drones overnight. Meanwhile, Ukraine is keeping a close eye on President-elect Trump and how appointments to his cabinet could impact the military aid sent from the West. Let's discuss all of this now with the former diplomat, Boris Bondarev, who worked for the Russian permanent mission to the UN office in Geneva in the past. Boris, great to have you with us. What do you think is Putin's interpretation of the Trump victory?
Good morning. I believe that Putin may see a chance in the election of Donald Trump as a new president of the United States, a chance to change the tide of the campaign in the Ukraine, and a chance to strike a deal, which we all know that President Trump is very much in love with many foreign policy deals. So he may wait that Trump may offer him something. But what Trump may offer Putin, we still have to see.
Is there a belief that there'll be a deal that's more favourable to Russia than to Ukraine? Or, the unpredictability, I guess, that comes with Donald Trump, is it something that means Putin is worried?
Well, I believe that Putin is quite confident in himself and in Russian positions now on the front line. We know that Russian troops are advancing, and the Ukrainian defense is albeit crumbling. And so Putin may hope that when Trump is in the office at last, Putin will be in a very strong position to dictate his terms. And of course, all deals or negotiations that may ensue on the peaceful settlement must be on the Putin's terms. That's his position that has ever been, and there is no sign that he will change it.
If in the hypothetical situation there was another year of things as they are, with a bit more coming to Ukraine from the West, but not permission to shoot into Russian territory, for example, would Russia end up winning? Are they on the up at the moment or not?
Well, hard to predict, because there are a lot of opinions whether Russian economy can survive so long or not. But it is quite evident that Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian society is very tired as well. And I'm afraid that if the West allows Russia to wage this war for 1, 2, maybe 3 more years, Ukrainians will just, get so exhausted that they will stop fighting, with all due respect.
There's been reports that Russia ran a missile drill from one of its ships in and around the English Channel. Is that something that you think did actually take place? And if so, is it a wildly provocative act, or something that, believe it or not, does happen from time to time?
Well, first, as far as I understand, it was a drill, and drills are conducted from time to time. But of course, when this ship was in the English Channel, of course, it was kind of a provocative act. It's a reminder to the United Kingdom that Russia still has some capabilities, and they can bring you some pain. But I don't think that the Russian Navy is the main concern, and should be main concern for the United Kingdom. It's the nuclear capabilities which are a concern, but not conventional ones.
Is it something that you think Putin did intentionally and timed intentionally in and around the US election results, or not?
I think that Putin is and will be playing with muscles, so to speak, until President Trump is in the office. So, as I just said, to be in the most strong position that he can afford. So he dictates some terms, and he dictates what President Trump is going to offer him, not vice versa. So President Putin wants to have initiative in this, and he does. And he's going to impose his will, his wishes, his view of the situation upon the United States, upon the United Kingdom, upon the European Union, upon Ukraine, not the other way around.
What is the view in Russia of individuals like Waltz and Rubio? They're very clearly hawkish towards China. Their views towards Ukraine are less clear, but it's not believed that they'll be in any way warm to Russia.
Well, I think that there might be a kind of an expectation that the new U.S. Foreign policy bosses would be so much focused on China that they would try to neglect Russia or to try to break away Russia from China. And I think that is groundless hopes, because Russian alliance with China is quite strong now. It's situational, of course. It's not, well, so to speak, strategic, but in the terms of today, it is much more important for both sides, for China and Russia, than to Russia and the United States. For instance, the United States has nothing to offer Putin to buy him out of the deal with China, right? They do not have enough leverage on him, except for the massive military aid to Ukraine. So I think that if new American top diplomats would like to pursue this course of action, so let's focus on China, that could be a huge miscalculation on their side.
Boris Bondarev, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
We have some breaking news now, and our city editor, Mark Kleiman, is here with The Scoop. As always, Mark, what can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right, Wilf. Some significant news about Homebase, one of Britain's best-known retail businesses today. As I understand it, Homebase will fall into administration later on this morning as part of a deal that the administrators have lined up with a privately owned general merchandise chain called The Range. The Range will take on about 70 to 75 of Homebase's stores, and that will save about 1,500 Homebase jobs. However, there will be question marks over the fate of about 1,700 more employees at Homebase. Another 50-odd stores will continue to trade in the administration, and the administrators will look for buyers for those remaining 50 stores. I think it's worth pointing out, Wilf, that to set this in context, that this comes at a time when British retailers are complaining furiously about the additional cost pressures they're facing in the wake of last month's budget. Just this morning, the British Retail Consortium has written to Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, to say that price increases and job losses are inevitable. Now, Homebase itself has been running a sale process for several months. It's not directly, its collapse into administration is not directly a result of the budget, but it's indicative of the fact that Britain's retail sector at the moment is feeling a lot of pain and is appealing for help from politicians to see them through this crisis.
So you mentioned Homebase was in the process of a sales process anyway. So was that expected to take place in a normal course of action in the private market, not to need the company to fall into administration?
Yeah, I mean, there have been talks going on for several months with The Range and with other retailers about a solvent deal. Homebase itself is facing several £1 million of additional tax contributions as a result of the national insurance changes announced in the budget. And it's been struggling since COVID and the subsequent cost of living crisis to kind of reinvigorate itself. Homebase was previously owned by an Australian company called Wesfarmers, which analysts dubbed the worst retail takeover in British history. It was then sold in 2018 to Hilco, a financial investor, and Hilco has tried to revive the business. It's an experienced retail investor, but ultimately COVID and the cost of living crisis, which has seen consumers spending less money on major home improvement projects, has put paid to a solvent deal.
Mark, as always, thanks so much, Mark Kleiman, with the scoop, as always. So still to come here on The Breakfast Show. "40 years on, Band-Aid to release a new version of this Christmas classic." We'll discuss next.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. Well, for some, it might still be a little early to be mentioning Christmas music. Not for any of us, though, right?
No.
No?
No. For me, way too early.
Oh,
Anyway, we'll get onto that later.
All right, well, we'll pretend Leah hasn't said that yet. But fans of Band-Aid will have cause for celebration very soon. To mark 40 years of Band-Aid, a new version of the song will be released. This year's version will be made as a compilation of the last three, all mixed together, set to be released, as you saw there. November 25th, plenty of time to give it a listen in the build-up to Christmas. Katie is here to talk about this with us. Katie, I have to say, I remember the two versions. I can't actually remember that there was a third.
The one and the 2014 one as well. It's
no, 84. I didn't know the 2014 one. I don't know what I was doing that year, but I missed it. Anyway, that teaser of the compilation was pretty epic.
It's like the ultimate supergroup.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive to come up with the concept, really, I guess, of mixing them all together, because it pleases everyone, doesn't it? You got Harry Styles in
So
there.
also, though,
Boy
raise the question,
George.
were all three of the songs exactly the same to allow you to merge them together easily?
They're the same words, but sort of mixed differently. But I guess that's the thing, isn't it? If it's the same lyrics, you can cut them together and do work your super producer magic and get it sounding nice. Add a few sleigh bells. But what we don't know is who's singing what lines. The only one that we can absolutely guarantee is Bono, that's been on all three of them, singing, thank God it's them instead. Don't do the singing.
Please keep going with that. But because he always had a bit of a spat. I remember when the second one came out that he wanted to keep the same
There
line.
was rumours, or Justin Hawkins from The Darkness re-recorded, well, tonight, thank God it's them instead of you. And he, in a jokey... come on, Wilf.
Oh, he's brilliant. Karaoke with Wilfred Frost. Yes.
I'm not sure. We'll get him a pint and then...
Really enjoyable thing to do.
But there was rumours that...
Love a bit of karaoke.
Justin Hawkins claimed that he'd sung it better than Bono, but the powers that be said that it still had to be Bono. You can't replace Bono.
Who is the powers that be with this? Sorry.
Bob Geldof, do we think, maybe? The fans?
Bob Geldof.
Who gets the final say? Is it too late to get Wilfred Frost singing?
It's never too late. I think it is for the world.
It's never too late.
This is to raise money. It's an important cause.
We don't want anything.
I'm all for nostalgia, though, because that very 1984, right?
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Big stars, just re-release that. Why do we need to be chopping and changing?
It's true. I guess the thing is, nowadays, it is more likely that you're going to have a nostalgia hit as the Christmas number one. Think back to last year, and it was Wham's Last Christmas. I think that was the 40th anniversary as well. So that made history because it had never been the actual Christmas number one. But the way that the charts are now formulated is taking into account streaming and sales. So by default, because we stream so many of the old songs, it is more likely to be a song like Band-Aid or Do They Know It's Christmas, or some other anniversaries this year. You've got
East 17.
East 17, Stay Another Day.
That was my first ever single that I bought.
I might do that next time I do karaoke. You've reminded me. That is a classic.
Can we all buy white puffer jackets and do it together?
You mean dig out the old white puffer jacket?
I'm really enjoying this because it's the unravelling of Wilfred Frost.
Do you know what was a shame about E17? This was so epic, but like what other big songs? They should have had a career as great as Westlife saw.
Did they have other songs on now?
Did they? I don't think they did. I think they had one.
Deep down, deep down.
I think they had one, and then it. But look at this, a great video, great look,
There's going to be
great
E17
song.
fans up in arms that you only remember that it's Christmas songs.
It's not my fault. Can you remember any of the other ones? Anyway, it's also, so what is the anniversary of what?
30th anniversary. I'm interviewing
30.
Tony Mortimer next week, and I'm very excited.
Stop it.
Via piano.
Which
I'm
day?
going to get him to sing
Oh
to
my
me.
God, can I
Thursday.
come
It's
along?
very exciting. But Mariah Carey as well. All I Want for Christmas, 30th anniversary. She's re-recorded
Well, they were the
that
same
as well.
year.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Which one's number
would
one?
have been older. Oh, I don't know, Wilfred. Why are you asking?
It must be the Mariah Carey one. I mean, as much as I prefer East, I like them both, but unlikely that
number one,
anything
though.
beat Mariah.
Surely, E17 were at their height. Did it get
Well, it was a short-lived height based on what we're talking
based
about.
on your knowledge?
Yeah, based on my
What the
knowledge
songs were.
of this. I don't actually know how much longer we've got. Have we got time to keep going a little bit? Oh, we've still got another minute.
I am ready to defrost Mariah Carey from around the 25th
E17 got to number one, we're just being told.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, beat. So Mariah Carey's famous Christmas song was not Christmas number one.
I think it has since then got to number one because of the fact that we...
Do we even care about number ones anymore? It's all about just streaming, isn't it?
I'll get my coat. Fine. No, it means nothing, but hey, we get
No, but
to
it's
chat
not like
about
you have a
them.
single... It's who's streaming. There's no sales.
Well, no, sales are factored in because if you wanted to, you could buy Band-Aid on vinyl, which had amazing artwork from a very famous artist that I can't remember, Peter.
I bet you've got a vinyl machine.
Yeah, of course.
What is a vinyl machine called?
Vinyl machine, a record player.
Record player. There you go.
I think what we've learned here is
I'm
we
down
need...
with the kids, all on here for me. We're out of time, guys.
Karaoke, bye.
Pleasure as always. Up next, Kamali Melbourne.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle. treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Good morning, it is 10 o'clock. This is Sky News Today, your headlines. And breaking news, 115 post office branches at risk of closure, with more than 1,000 job cuts possible, all revealed as part of a plan to overhaul the service. Elon Musk is named as part of Donald Trump's presidential team, the world's richest man, to co-lead a department for cracking down on government waste. The president-elect also confirms a Fox News TV host as his new defense secretary. On the front line of the war in Ukraine, we go inside the units downing Russian drones as President Putin intensifies attacks.
They don't want their positions to be known by anyone who's potentially spying on them for the Russians, so they're going around trying to find the spent shells, and then they'll move and all trace of them will be gone.
A treatment plan for the NHS, the Health Secretary to confirm new measures to penalise failing health bosses and the worst performing hospitals, and a Christmas classic remade, Band-Aid's festive favourites to be re-released with a modern-day twist.